Oh, I completely lost it. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Break with Your Soul. My name is Maggie, and today I'm back with Poppy. Hi, Poppy.
Hi.
And today we'd like to explore a subject that comes up a lot in my conversations with others, and Poppy and I have been exploring it as well, which is really thoughts. And this idea in particular that in order for us to sort of have this living experience of our true nature in our day-to-day lives, in order for us to sort of experience the sort of abiding sense of peace, that we cannot, that we our minds have to be empty, that our thoughts are sort of standing in a way of experiencing that in a sort of abiding way. And I find this topic really fascinating. So Poppy, do you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts, your sort of first thoughts before we kind of go farther on this?
So brace yourself. So what happened?
I am.
Yeah. Who knows where this is going to go? I think I've said to you before, I remember a time where my innards came outwards, and honestly, I got that feels significant because it was like whatever that separation was, whatever my internal world was, there had always before been a difference between my internal world and my external expression of that world, right? So what I would have presented outwards would have felt very different quite often to what I was containing inside. So there would have been shame, guilt, feelings of inadequacy or unworthiness that I was maybe conscious or not conscious of. And I remember through suffering that started to destabilize, and I what was on the inside started to come out to the outer presentation, probably because I lost my defenses seemed to crumble, and I no longer was able to have this sense of boundary between this inner world and this outer presentation. And so thoughts that would happen, there was this sense of them flowing without this partition anymore. And in that happening, it felt to me at the time as though I had become now, because what arose was the same on the inside as it was on the outside. The partition had dissolved. So I had become now, because there was no separation. My innards had come outwards, and there was for some reason that felt to be significant. And I know I'm making a story up about that, but it felt to be significant. Is that the only way I can explain kind of how I recognized that I was just this now, and I was this arising now. I couldn't separate myself from it. I was not now a container that had a boundary and a partition that lived in this, what was here. I was it. I had become it. And so thoughts, I'm not quite sure I was going there with thoughts, but thoughts that arose were basically part of that, what was arising now. And I do remember that since then, I only realised this retrospectively, I didn't experience much self-referential thinking anymore. So as I became what seemed to stop, I'd say almost stop, because the one or two times I've experienced that conditioning, it's been a really novel, amazing experience, was the shame, or was the self-referential, constantly thinking, how am I doing? What do they think of me? Am I disapproved of? That seemed to stop arising because I had become now. And so what was on the inside, I would just say it, or I had no shame anymore with saying that I felt I'd done something wrong, for instance, or I had cocked up in some way. What had gone was the sense that I had to keep that on this side of the partition. I would just say, I cocked up. Oh, I cocked up. It was just a really normal. It felt very normal, but much more in flow. And so I think the thinking, I didn't experience self-referential thinking as much, definitely, or that kind of ruminative thinking. And that's not to say that I don't experience that ever. I experience it definitely less, but this body mind has conditioning that will experience that sometimes. but I experience it as what is arising now as an experience. It's not happening to a me anymore.
Right, right. And this is so fascinating. And someone wrote a comment, I think it was under the last video that we did, and quoted some kind of teacher, and I can't even remember the quote, the exact quote, but I remember that it felt so true, because it said that whatever this is like the end, it's the end of inner world.
Yeah.
It's the end of inner world. And I loved it so much, because I've never heard it. Like I never heard anyone say it. So I loved it so much, because yeah, there's like this merging that is happening, this sort of
Yeah.
collapsing, where there is no inner or outer world anymore. It's definitely not about having completely empty mind. There may be people that literally have absolutely no thoughts, because I can tell you that I have many moments, in particular when I don't have to function. Meaning, like, for example, when last year I went on nearly 2 week holiday, and I, other than the thoughts, the sort of functional thoughts being, okay, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to get my coffee, and lunch is at whatever, in between those sort of thoughts that allow to function,
Yes.
which must be there, obviously, even if I'm not consciously aware of them, there was nothing in between. So the mind definitely, at least in my experience, so far, is definitely way more quiet. And I think one of the reasons why it's way more quiet is because of what you were saying, which is that there's no thinking about yourself.
Yeah, it's honestly, it fascinates me how much self-referential thinking there must be that goes on, because when that quietened down, it definitely affected the level of thinking. But I only retrospectively realized that. I mean, like I said before, I've said this, I lived a really long time without knowing about non-duality or spirituality. I just knew that that life had profoundly changed. And definitely, I completely agree with you. Much of the time there was functional thinking. I'm going to put the kettle on. And there was a lot of joy, a lot of joy, like over just everyday things, just all the time, the bubbling of joy. Because I think there was so much less selfing going on. But I've just, like I said to you before, I've just had over Christmas like a health, issue, and so after a really long time of having very little like just functional thinking happening, and living with that in that state of just real equanimity, I have experienced a phase of more thinking, which I haven't experienced for so long. But rather than being identified with it, I experience what it's like to experience thinking once more here and there, so I've kind of had this really recent experience of, wow, this body mind clearly, when it's anxious, thinks. And that is less triggered and less often than ever, than my earlier life. But I have just had this really recent, so it's been really novel to me, because I hadn't had that for about 10 years. And I've just had this experience of several weeks of experiencing that ruminative thinking a bit more. And so that's been a really interesting experience, because alongside all that comes other thoughts that trigger off the back of it, like, why am I thinking like that again? Look at that. Wow, I've just thought that, so it's just this experience what it's like to think again, to have that rumination experience again. Has been quite like novel.
And would you, so thank you, by the way, for saying that, because again, it just shows that stuff comes up. But
Yeah.
I think that, I think for me that the sort of primary observation is that it's when that sense of separation or the sense of self sort of dissolve, there is nothing, there's no thought that anything should not be there, whether it's thoughts, whether it's those kind of thoughts, or worrying thoughts, whatever thoughts, it's just everything is just arising. And I
Yeah.
think that perhaps would you say, I mean, I don't know if you can still remember that, but do you think that, do you see the difference? Do you remember what it would be like had you had that identification? Had there be
Oh,
still the sense of solid
yeah.
self?
It has been, I mean, honestly, I completely, before I say that thing, definitely less judgment. There's very little judgment. And I think because to judge something as being that shouldn't happen, or this shouldn't happen, that shouldn't arise, that requires that inner and outer world. And I had never heard somebody talk about the inner world, no more inner world actually, but I definitely resonate with that. That was
I love it so much.
yeah, my innards came outwards. That's what I used to say before I knew, 10 years ago, before I knew any of this. I would have said to somebody, I don't know, my innards have just come outwards. I can't stop it anymore. there's no defense anymore, like there's just, it goes straight through, and things would come straight through this way. So I just seem to have lost my defense, I guess, that we are so unconscious we've got.
And what about in a context of this particular experience where you had this health situation, which we could absolutely qualify as a so-called health scare, right? So what was that experience like? Do you think that before, if you can still remember that, do you think that you would go into way more worry?
Oh my gosh, yes. So because this is quite fresh in my mind still, I think I can probably have a stab at explaining this. Before, I'd have been completely preoccupied with anxiety. I'd have thought about nothing else. It would have been hell on earth, because I would have woken up thinking about it, felt really preoccupied all day, not functioning very well, and I would have gone to bed like that every night. That was what it would have been like before. Now, this time, there was a subtle difference that I experienced. I still experienced having the experience of anxiety, and sometimes I'd even go as far as to say I experienced the experience of preoccupation. But I was aware that that experience was happening and that it was not me. It was like I was experiencing what it was like to experience that.
Mm-hmm.
It was arising, but it was arising to no one. So that was the subtle difference. So I was still experiencing this conditioning of this mind. Clearly my mind you still experience the conditioning, but it's just experienced as movement rather than it's happening to me. That's the difference. So it was different, and it was quite intense at times, because it was like I was, there was a lot of uncertainty for a period of time, and so I definitely. But looking at the two ways of experiencing that, this one was so fascinating, like so fascinating. And even when that preoccupation would come up, there was a sense of fascination with it. Like, look at that.
Yeah.
And look at that. That is so hard. There was compassion for it. So that, as worry, or as these painful, difficult emotions or thinking patterns come up, there's a love for them, because there's a seeing that they are impersonal, that they are experienced because of conditioning, that they're just not they're not owned anymore. They're not owned in the same way they used to be. There's love for it. There's a compassion for
I think I'm not sure 100% obviously, but I think what you're describing is what I call like a memory, or like a residue of like remembering. It's like a memory that comes up where you sort of still remember, where you remember what it would have been like before, if in these particular circumstances, or with this particular situation, if something like that arose. So there's like a memory of that, but it can't play out anymore. It's just impossible for it to play out anymore. And I think that it's like you're saying, I think there cannot be any sense of disconnection from anything, because that implies separation. When there is no separation, then you're this and the thoughts. It's
Yeah.
you know, there is no because there is no making of distinction between the two. There's no need to push anything away. It's just what is. If the worrying thoughts are arising, then they're arising. But there is almost a sense of I mean, if I had to go to like nitty, like some kind of visual, some kind of visual demonstration of this, it almost feels like, you know, I'm this infinite space.
Yeah.
And in that space, this body appears, and that
Yeah.
body is an experiencing, and the thoughts arise, they're experiencing, but there is nothing. It's like everything is just sort of floating.
Yes.
It doesn't, there's nothing to stick, nothing sticks to anything. So like there's nothing to stick to anything. So so the, you know, the pushing of anything away, the sense of disconnection, the resistance, all of it is just it's not there. But if there is an energy, like you said, because I think again, now we're going into like subtleties, because the bottom line is that whatever arises is there and is part of that experiencing. So even if there is an energy of some kind of resistance, right, which is not going to be psychological anymore, because I believe that that's impossible at this point, you know, for any kind of like psychological resistance that says, oh, it should not be happening, you know, or something like that. But if there's like an energetic, some kind of in a body kind of sensation of resistance, then that too is immediately recognized, and it's also part of what's arising. So it's not an issue.
Absolutely. It's like literally anything could arise. Literally anything could arise. And yeah, it's like, I totally agree with you. It's like, I am this, and in this there may be the experience of bodiness and, you know, thoughts, but it's just that I am this. There's no there's no container anymore. So there's no outer, back and front. I do kind of get what I'm not sure who was that said about the foreground and the background. I can understand that that's a way of trying to visualize how before thinking was all there was. It was so here, and then after you know, awakening, there was the experience was of being this. So there was much greater sense or experience of presence. There was I am this, and so the thinking and that, maybe I can see why they would describe it like that, because it felt more background. It was a movement within this. I think it's the positionality of it that's a little bit misleading, because actually it's just arising in this. It's just is this. I am there. You know, I am this. And so thinking may arise in this, and there's conditioning that arises in this, and residue and imprints, conditioning that arises in this. But there's a recognition that is what is just arising, and there's a disidentification from it, a fundamental knowing that is not me. There is no me. I am this, all of it, and anything could arise in it. Yeah,
I totally agree with you that foreground, background. This is why it made sense to me, and I sort of found it compelling. And there was a stage at which this is exactly how it was experienced. You really felt as though the thoughts sort of moved to the background.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they were not as intruding, or they were just like not in your face, you know, anymore. There's like, right. So I definitely remember a period where this is how it was experienced. It's just, and maybe you're right, maybe it's just, you know, again, the sort of limitations of this language and being able to describe what's a really, really subtle experience, as in experientially, everything is just so subtle. And I would say that the difference is now that there is no sense of background or foreground. There's just what is, and so whatever it is, it just is. It's not in the back, it's not in the front, it's just everywhere. Honestly, our journeys, and I am relentless in sort of saying this. Our journeys are really unique. I think it's so important to not compare our journeys to other people, because I really believe that wherever we're at is perfect. It's just exactly as it's meant to be. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I think it can be really unhelpful comparing, because that just leads to more self-referential thinking, actually. I think that conditioning, the conditioned patterns, to experience those doesn't mean, it doesn't mean it's just what is, just part of what is.
Absolutely. This is so extremely important, Poppy. It to really say that. And I remember having like a very quick exchange with one of the non-duality teachers who I really respect, because she's she's incredibly human. Like she's so just down to earth, and just so incredible, because you can just tell that she just lived it all. And I remember her saying that arrival is not rather, awakening is not an arrival point, which is what I often say in many ways, and neither is liberation. This idea that after the sense of self sort of dissolves, or a sense of separation dissolves, that's it, that we arrived somewhere where nothing is arising anymore. And again, this will be different to different people, but the one thing that I think everybody who experienced it would agree is that there is no assumption that nothing should arise anymore. You know what I mean? There's no expectations of any ending. And I would say, how could you? How can we, when you touch this infinity, this mystery of who we truly are, it's virtually impossible. First of all, you realize that you absolutely know nothing, that you can only speak of what is your direct experience, and then translate it poorly into into words. But there's absolutely, I think that for as long as we're in this human form, stuff is bound to arise. But I think the major difference is that there is no assumption that nothing should arise anymore, first of all. And there's actually a rejoicing when something shows up, when something is triggered, when something comes up to the surface, whether it's some sort of sticky thoughts, maybe, I don't know, maybe not sticky, but some sort of maybe disturbing thoughts, or maybe there's certain patterns or some wounds coming to the surface out of the sun that you thought you were done and over with, and here they are. You actually rejoice when that happens, because everything wants to come home. Nothing is not supposed to not be there, right?
Yeah, there's I definitely experience an incredible fascination about, it's like experiencing yourself as no thing and as this human form at the same time. So you're no thing and form. And of course, in the experiencing of form comes all of the complexity and messiness of that form. So, but this experience that was certainly from here, there's the experiencing of both of those together at the same time. Like, I am no thing and I am this form. And so, this form can be really messy sometimes. And whilst it changed after awakening, some patterns definitely changed and didn't arise anymore. But essentially and fundamentally, I'm still experiencing the messiness of this form in its own, unique way, and annoying way sometimes. But it's just that there's also this deep knowing, fundamental knowing that it is not me. So the experiencing of what it's like to be this form, whilst not identifying with the form, but experiencing what it's like to be this form. And like as you say, that can be anything. And once we stop being so black and white about what it's meant to be like, then we can actually be there is liberation in that, because you realize that this form operates in a really mechanical way. And there's nothing really, there'd be nothing that would come up that I couldn't trace back to something that had happened before. So it's very, actually, it's really impersonal. And in that, in the impersonal nature of the mechanics of this form, there is liberation, because there's no shame in it anymore. It's like an operating system, built upon what its conditioning was. Yeah. And so sense of it being shameful anymore, even the bits.
And like you said, there's real a fascination. You actually like, wow, this is incredible, look at this, right? And it's just there's almost like an awe, you know, when you explore this experience. And you know, it doesn't matter whether you had an awakening or liberation or whatever, we still experience this humanness. We still, life still brings situations that are extremely challenging. And yes, is there a fundamental difference in how this stuff is experienced? Yes, but the stuff is being experienced, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so important what you said, that while it is absolutely brilliant that this richness of different experiences, different ways people talk about it, you know, it's to really not to really always remember that everybody is just sharing what they know, how things appear to them, their interpretation, including Poppy and I. We're just sharing some kind of an interpretation of what is experienced directly, but neither Poppy and I are interested in presenting it, what we're saying as, and therefore this is how it is, and therefore this is how things should be, and therefore everybody should be experiencing in a way we do.
Yeah. In fact, if we'd have had this recording 6 weeks ago, I would have spoke it very differently, because in that time I've had this quite novel experience of experiencing rumination again. And it, you know, experiencing what it's like to have that preoccupation again, and that's been quite a novel experience for me. And so, you know, we might in 6 weeks time have a completely different take on something.
Yeah, exactly. See, this is, let's see what life brings. Let's see what comes up. This is why, you know, I think one of the, if there's one of the most liberating byproducts of liberation is really that there is absolutely no it's the end of attachment to what we think we know, to any perspective, to any opinion, to any one interpretation. You literally, as soon as it was told, it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, and there's also the end to the sense of needing to defend and protect. So, so there's no sense of needing to say this is how it is and this is correct. Because I think just with that sense of non-judgment and that liberation that comes, there is just an incredible humility. It's like that's all there is, actually. Like, now what is humility. Reality and humility are one, and you are that. And so when that division dissipates, there's just all there is left is humility, because you are it and it is you.
Yeah, and you really, there's almost like a sense. I mean, there are many times that I can't tell you, Poppy, how many times I do someone's reading, for example, and I burst into tears, you know, like, not like sobbing, like, please don't think that, like, I start sobbing for an hour during my professional one-on-one session. But I get really, there were few times that I got so emotional, I had to take a minute, actually, because when seeing what the person's been through, and I feel it very, very deeply when I look at it, you know, and it's almost like you just bow down to this experience, you just bow down to this humanity. You see no it's so it's the humility that you're talking about, you know. It's this human experience, and the seeing of this divinity and humanity sort of coming together, not as separate, you know. And then it's just how can it not embrace everything? It's virtually impossible, you know.
Some of my most profound experiences have been through the surrender to reality, through the giving into reality. In fact, it's the most, to give into reality, to stand apart from reality and believe that I am separate, is such a precarious position. And what I experience here anyway is when I have resisted and I give in to reality and I bow to reality, it is the most, like, humbling but exquisite. It's almost like bliss. There's it's like that dying into reality. It's like it feels like the annihilation into reality is such a it's almost like ecstatic. So it's like ecstasy and pain are together, they are one. It's can't differentiate them in the end.
But you know, Poppy, I think this is why it's so important. Maybe we should have clarified it at the beginning. But why these, you know, the meanings that we attach to terms actually do matter in these conversations, because it just before we started recording, I was looking, I had my YouTube page open and a video popped up by someone I don't think I've maybe once listened to this particular teacher, Rupert Spira.
Yeah.
And I actually took a note because I knew that I would forget. There was a video, it is not enough to discover what you are not. And I think that this is, and again, I when I saw this line, it really spoke to, and again, I don't know if this is what he meant by it. I'm not suggesting that because I haven't watched the video. But when I saw this line, I think it really spoke to the distinction that I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation, which is that to see that we live in a thought-created reality, to see that I was not my thoughts, this person here, you know, that I didn't have to believe my thoughts, right? That was not enough, in a sense that because there was still that sense of me that was not my thoughts. So even though the impact of that was absolutely massive and it stayed there, you know, it wasn't until that the solution of separation or self, because to me this is actually synonymous, happened, that this idea of the need of there being no thoughts or no disturbing emotions was completely gone. There was no sense of self anymore that needed no thoughts in order to feel the true nature in a sort of abiding in an abiding moment, you know, in every moment kind of a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely. Because to stand apart, to be a self and to stand apart, you're already in a defended position. You know, you're having to protect and defend. And I think that once that goes, it does change things so dramatically.
Yeah, and for some people it will be it certainly for me was a gradual process in that awakening for me was really only a beginning, and I can only know that in retrospect that this was the beginning of the collapsing and dissolving of a sense of separate self. The beliefs, the patterns, the everything was coming up to the surface, and it had to be seen. For some people it will be more dramatic, you know, to sort of everything will sort of collapse in one go. But I truly believe that regardless of where we're at, these patterns will be arising. There will be maybe less frequently, maybe it's going to be less intense, but it's in either case, and even whether we're interested in awakening or not, it's always incredible to explore this, to meet the patterns, to really explore what's really true. Because once these patterns are seen, once they're recognized, they dissolve. So it's not even about bad patterns, you know, it's not about getting rid of anything or fixing anything. It's just about recognizing what's true, right?
And I'm sure some patterns some patterns are more deeply rooted and stubborn than others, and they rise. There's just a perceiving of them more, you know, more clearly, very clearly often will perceive them in real time as they're coming up. So, you know, in real time as a pattern's emerging, I'll think, wow, look at that. Look at that.
And some stuff that actually comes up, you know, once that sort of what I call like the psychology is sort of tidied up, you know what I mean? Like there's the conscious stuff, there's the conscious patterns, but I really feel that, and you know, that there's so much, you use this term in one of our conversations, that the conditioning is not just here, sort of. It's also in the body. So it's like literally what the nervous system remembers that's been deeply ingrained. And then, so sometimes you may literally not even be aware of any conscious thought or story or anything, and yet a reaction, but now it's like very energetic, kind of something is being triggered and comes up. But again, it's like, wow, you know what I mean? It's like you just want to love this and
Yeah,
feel this and
yeah.
welcome this, right?
It feels like just peeling an onion, doesn't it? It's like every time you become conscious of another pattern, you then find another one underneath it and another one underneath it. And so life becomes a little bit of an unraveling experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Of seeing more and more things that you hadn't seen before. I know for me, I don't like, because I wasn't a spiritual seeker or anything, I don't remember there being a um like I know Angelo sometimes talks about like stepping off the edge, like you know you're there and you decide you're going to go, like you kind of finally give over. And I didn't experience that. I did, all I know, I did definitely experience a giving in, honestly, because the suffering was so bad for so long. I did experience a giving in, and it was like did feel like a sense of death, actually. Um, but yeah, so our story, like our journeys are so different. Yeah, but definitely, I think conditioning still arises. I think that's probably one of the takeaways for me, is because otherwise we have really black and white thinking, and we think that we must be in like a state of serenity like all the time. But I think what there can be is a lot of movement and serenity. So
Yes,
that's
yes,
experience.
yes, 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 yes,
It's
yes.
movement, this conditioned movement of the, like my nervous system, my somatic response I was experiencing so much movement which I'd not experienced for decades. And then at the same time there was experiencing it from a position of peace, from a still position, from a stillness. So it's like I really experienced the two. Was, you know, yeah, it was just such a curious experience.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the that's the brilliant sort of conclusion, I would say, to this conversation, that it really is the end of either or, and this idea that something should not be there in order for that sense of who we truly are to be abiding, you know, to that is just it both things that I mean, you can literally be in the midst of whatever turmoil
Yeah,
it is, you know, or some kind of upset or anything like that, and literally feel either just a sense of, you use the word equanimity quite a bit, or there's just there actually can be a serenity in the midst of even something painful,
definitely.
you know, which I think just comes, I don't know where it comes, but I think it just comes from just seeing the mystery of it all and appreciating it. And I think that I think that once you see that whatever is arising cannot be different to what it is, then
Yeah,
even the ideas of letting go or surrendering make no sense, because
yeah,
there's nobody there anymore to do the surrendering or letting go. So everything is just experienced, you know, in this, as this, you
yeah,
know, that's
yeah.
it.
Absolutely. Brilliant way to end. I think it's being the stillness and the movement at the same time. And the
Yeah,
stillness is that's the like love. There's
yeah,
a complete and utter embrace of everything. But yeah,
that's
you
it.
nailed it.
So you nailed it as well. And yet the journey continues, the
Yeah.
exploration continues, and there's absolutely, you know, no ultimate answers to be found or to even look for. So thank you, Poppy, for yet another exploration. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and that perhaps you found some of our perspectives on it helpful, or maybe a bit clarifying. And thank you so much for watching again. Take care. Bye.
Bye.